In this video, I'm going to review some tips for understanding opinion polls. You will often encounter descriptions of survey data in media articles like this one, where it describes whether Canadians are satisfied with something or not, whether the public approves of something or not. And one of the things that it's important to do is match the headline to the data, because sometimes the way that survey findings are described in a headline don't always match with the underlying data. So as a starting point, it's always a good idea to read the article, find out who did the poll, and what information you can learn about it. So in this case, you can find the reference in the text that this was done by Nanos Research, and it was published in the same week as the article. So that gives us something to work with. Then locate the polling firm. The Laurier Institute for the Study of Public Opinion provides a list of Canadian polling firms. You can jump right to the firm's website from here. Once you do, locate the different firms. This is Ipsos by Daryl Bricker. You can find out what information they have made available, because each firm will make some different decisions. In this case, there's a media release and then some more detailed information as well. Every firm will be slightly different in what they're willing to share. Here's what I like to look for. Is there some kind of summary report? This is often geared towards the media or public consumption, describes a general description of the data. I also look to see whether there's more detail provided. Data tables with subgroups, so if you can get an idea if there's different demographic breakdowns, maybe by province or by age group. These are sometimes called crosstabs. And you depending on if you've ever taken any research methods courses, you'll be able to look into the different demographic subgroups and find out how they responded to the question. There's also a list of questions. Some firms will do this, some firms don't, but they might provide a separate code book that gives a list of the questions, how each question was presented or read if it was a live interview, and that can help inform your understanding of the poll as well. What does a summary report look like? Well, again, these are geared towards the media, almost like a press release, so they can use this information to craft their stories. Angus Reid provides a pretty detailed summary with some graphics. Other outlets, slightly different. Abacus Data provides a very narrative summary on their website, along with some graphics that can be used not only for journalists to create stories, but for the public to help understand what's being described. Other firms will put together a slide deck. Here's one from Nanos Research. It's usually in PDF form, but it gives you a set of slides that walk you through the findings with graphics and a narrative description as well. When people talk about polls, they'll sometimes reference the top line results. This is sort of the main finding or the primary question that the poll was seeking to answer. Here's one from Pew Research. You can see how they've asked the same question over and over again, and it's the first question they've asked. So this is what they sort of built their survey around, and then after that there would probably be more specific and more variable questions as well. But the top line results, this is the main finding that the poll is generally talking about. Once you get into the crosstabs, the detailed breakdown of different subgroups and how they responded to the question, it'll give you an idea of how different segments of the population responded to a question. So for example, if overall the public approved of something, you can see whether that broke down differently across age groups or gender. This particular one broke down how people trust different groups and institutions based on their community involvement. So are people that are really involved in the community, they have different opinions compared to those who are not as involved. And so these different demographic subgroups, sometimes they're ideological, can help us understand how these opinions are spread throughout the population. You can get very detailed. Angus Reid provides a really good, almost overwhelming set of crosstabs for theirs. If you really want to get into the data and find out how province or responses varied across province, for example, you could do that here. The only note of caution is that sometimes these subsamples, these subgroups, are really, really small. So you might say, look at the approval of a politician and read about a province like Newfoundland or something. Well, they might only have a handful of respondents from that province. So in the broader survey, they may have 1,500, but once you get into these subsamples, these subgroups, it's really hard to make generalizations because the samples are so small. In Canadian polling, we often combine them. You'll see some firms that combine Saskatchewan and Manitoba, for example, Saskatoba they'll call it, just because there really aren't enough responses from those groups to look at them individually and get any meaningful insight. Another thing to look at is the methodology. Most opinion polls will have an accompanying statement of methodology that tells you exactly how the survey was conducted, who paid for it, when it was in the field, and how many people responded. Here's another example, this one from Nanos Research. They're talking about their phone methodology, where they're sampling some people with landlines, some people with cell phones, getting 250 respondents each week. That's called a rolling sample, where they're sort of on the last day, they'll sort of bump off the previous week and then add 250 more responses to the sample. So they've got a moving average of how the public feels about a specific issue. They call that a tracking poll. The nice thing about tracking polls is that they let you know how opinion is changing over time. And so by calling 250 people each week, you get a pretty good idea of how sentiment shifts on specific issues. Others use online panels. Phone calling can be expensive, and polling, you have to make a lot of phone calls to get a very tiny number of responses. So many agencies use online panels, and these are groups of people that do surveys for money sometimes, or in the case of the Angus Reid Forum, these are volunteers that get paid in gift cards. And the neat thing about online panels is that they can craft a sample to match the Canadian population. So you don't need to worry about sampling enough people of a certain age, because they can ask for that. When they're putting a panel together, they can say, I want a certain number of people in this age group across provinces and so on, to try and match the demographics of the Canadian population. Another thing to look for is the actual questions. How was the survey delivered? And the code book might describe that. Sometimes the survey questions are just built in with the summary, but it gives you an idea of what's being asked. So in this particular example, we know that it's respondents in Canada and the US. The question was displayed online as a grid. So the respondents, they would have a grid where they could just select different boxes. We know that the list was randomized. Sometimes that's a concern. You know, if there's an item that appears at the top of the list all the time, it might get selected more frequently. So we know that these are randomized, and the responses were satisfied, very satisfied, dissatisfied, and very dissatisfied. And so that sort of Likert type style without a midpoint can tell us a lot. For one, we know there's no don't know option, so people were forced to make a choice here. And when the media talks about a group being satisfied or dissatisfied, this will at least give us some more detail. You know, what are they talking about? Are they lumping together the satisfied and dissatisfied? How is that being described in the headline? So it's always good to know what questions were asked when you're trying to compare it to the headline. Now, just to recap, talking about reading opinion polls, how to understand the media description of the poll based on the actual data that's in there. And we can find this from the polling firms themselves. They'll give us a summary. They will give us some more detailed data tables, crosstabs, typically a statement of methodology to describe the nuts and bolts of the survey, how they got those respondents. And oftentimes, it's important to look at the actual questions just to see exactly how the questions were asked to respondents.